Penguin Random House Audio presents The Acts of King Arthur and His Noble Knights by John Steinbeck. Edited by Chase Horton. Read for you by Nezar Alderazi.
Introduction. Some people there are who, being grown, forget the horrible task of learning to read. It is perhaps the greatest single effort that the human undertakes, and he must do it as a child. An adult is rarely successful in the undertaking. The reduction of experience to a set of symbols. For 1,000 years these humans have existed, and they have only learned this trick, this magic, in the final 10,000 of the 1,000,000. I do not know how usual my experience is, but I have seen in my children the appalled agony of trying to learn to read. They, at least, have my experience. I remember that words, written or printed, were devils, and books, because they gave me pain, were my enemies. Some literature was in the air around me. The Bible I absorbed through my skin. My uncles exuded Shakespeare, and Pilgrim's Progress was mixed with my mother's milk. But these things came into my ears. They were sounds, rhythms, figures. Books were printed demons, the tongues and thumbscrews of outrageous persecution. And then, one day, an aunt gave me a book and fatuously ignored my resentment. I stared at the black print with hatred, and then, gradually, the pages opened and let me in. The magic happened. The Bible and Shakespeare and Pilgrim's Progress belonged to everyone. But this was mine. It was a cut version of the Caxton Morte d'Arthur of Thomas Malory. I loved the old spelling of the words, and the words no longer used. Perhaps a passionate love for the English language opened to me from this one book. I was delighted to find out paradoxes, that cleave means both to stick together and to cut apart, that host means both an enemy and a welcoming friend, that king and gens, people, stem from the same root. For a long time I had a secret language, yclept and height, whist, and accord meaning peace, and entente meaning purpose, and fuance meaning promise. Moving my lips, I pronounced the letter known as thorn, like a P, which it resembles, instead of a TH. But in my town, the first word of ye old pie shop was pronounced ye, so I guess my betters were no better off than I. It was much later that I discovered that Y had been substituted for the lost P. But beyond the glorious and secret words, "And when the child is born, let it be delivered to me at yonder privy postern unchristened." Oddly enough, I knew the words from whispering them to myself. The very strangeness of the language did me enchant, and vaulted me into an ancient scene. And in that scene were all the vices that ever were, and courage and sadness and frustration, but particularly gallantry. Perhaps the only single quality of man that the West has invented. I think my sense of right and wrong, my feeling of noblesse oblige, and any thought I may have against the oppressor and for the oppressed, came from this secret book. It did not outrage my sensibilities as nearly all the children's books did. It did not seem strange to me that Uther Pendragon wanted the wife of his vassal and took her by trickery. I was not frightened to find that there were evil knights as well as noble ones. In my own town there were men who wore the clothes of virtue whom I knew to be bad. In pain or sorrow or confusion, I went back to my magic book. Children are violent and cruel, and good, and I was all of these, and all of these were in the secret book. If I could not choose my way at the crossroads of love and loyalty, neither could Lancelot. I could understand the darkness of Mordred, because he was in me too, and there was some Galahad in me, but perhaps not enough. The Grail feeling was there, however, deep planted, and perhaps always will be. Later, because the spell persisted, I went to the sources, to the Black Book of Carmarthen, to the Mabinogion and other Welsh tales, from the Red Book of Hurgest, to De Excidio Britanniae by Gildas, to Giraldus Cumbrensis Historia Britonum, and to many of the French books Malory speaks of. And with the sources, I read the scholarly diggings and scrabblings, Chambers, Sommer, Gollancz, Saintsbury, but I always came back to Malory, or perhaps I should say to Caxton's Malory, since that was the only Malory there was until a little over 30 years ago, when it was announced that an unknown Malory manuscript had been discovered in the Fellows' Library of Winchester College. The discovery excited me, but being no scholar but only an enthusiast, I had neither the opportunity nor the qualification to inspect the find, until in 1947 Eugene Guinevere, professor of French language and literature at the University of Manchester, edited his great 3-volume edition of the works of Sir Thomas Malory for Oxford University, taken from the Winchester manuscript. No better man could have been chosen for the work than Professor Guinevere, with his great knowledge, not only of the French books, but also of the Welsh, Irish, Scottish, Breton, and English sources. He has brought to the work, beyond his scholarly approach, the feeling of wonder and delight so often lacking in a schoolman's methodology. For a long time, I've wanted to bring to present-day usage the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. These stories are alive even in those of us who have not read them, and in our day, we are perhaps impatient with the old words and the stately rhythms of Malory. My own first and continuing enchantment with these things is not generally shared. I wanted to set them down in plain present-day speech for my own young sons, and for other sons not so young, to set the stories down in meaning as they were written, leaving out nothing and adding nothing, perhaps to compete with the moving pictures, the comic strip travesties, which are the only available source for those children and others of today who are impatient with the difficulties of Malory's spelling and use of archaic words. If I can do this and keep the wonder and the magic, I shall be pleased and gratified. In no sense do I wish to rewrite Malory, or reduce him, or change him, or soften or sentimentalize him. I believe the stories are great enough to survive my tampering, which at best will make the history available to more readers, and at worst can't hurt Malory very much. At long last, I am abandoning the Caxton of my first love for the Winchester, which seems to me more knee-deep in Malory than Caxton was. I am indebted to Professor Eugene Guinevere for his making the Winchester manuscript available. For my own part, I can only ask that my readers include me in the request of Sir Thomas Malory when he says, "And I pray you all that read of this tale to pray for him that this wrote, that God send him good deliverance, and soon and hastily. Amen." Merlin. When Uther Pendragon was King of England, his vassal, the Duke of Cornwall, was reported to have committed acts of war against the land. Then Uther ordered the Duke to attend his court, and to bring with him his wife, Igraine, who was famed for her wisdom and beauty. When the Duke arrived before the king, the great lords of the council made peace between them so that the king offered his friendship and his hospitality. Then Uther looked at the lady Igraine, and saw that she was as beautiful as he had heard. He loved her, and desired her, and begged her to lie with him. But Igraine was a faithful wife, and she refused the king. She spoke privately to the Duke, her husband, saying, "I believe that you were not sent for because of transgression. The king has planned to dishonor you through me. Therefore I beg you, my husband, that we may creep away from this danger and ride in the night to our own castle, for the king will not tolerate my refusal." And, as she wished,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?